This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Friest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Welcome to this episode of Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. Thanks for listening. With an encore career, the rewards are better than a cold beer on a hot day. And you can be creating value in the world beyond just winning that next pickleball game. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love. You can live the dream. So if you're ready to get started today, please contact me at lynn@lynnfriest.com. Thanks. Today is episode 180, and it's Planning Life and Money for Your Next Chapter with Justin Smith. Justin is a financial planner, and he helps executives and successful professionals in their 50s and 60s. And they're at a career crossroads, and they're planning for their next chapter. Whether they wish to stay in the corporate arena, retire, or maybe blur the lines and be in pursuit of the best of both worlds. Justin helps them explore what's possible, creates a plan, and minimize taxes in the process. Justin specializes in helping executives and successful professionals navigate that chapter between full-time work and a full-stop retirement. It's a thing he calls a victory lap. He wants to help people find clarity and confidence in this most rewarding part of their life. So some of the things we'll talk about is his journey and how he views his role as a financial planner, how he looks at retirement as a victory lap, and what do you want to do is just as important as how you will pay for it. So let's talk to Justin. Well, welcome, Justin. It's great to have you on the podcast. Looking forward to your insights on financial planning and the new retirement. But first, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Thanks for having me, Lynn. Yeah, I'm excited to be here today. So the work I do is primarily focused on helping executives and successful professionals design their next chapter. From my experience, the traditional retirement has been slowly fading away. The pandemic really accelerated this trend. When I started 18 years ago in the business, not too many people pursued the hybrid approach. They were very fixated on getting to age 65 or whatever that number was, getting their pension or benefit vesting, and then they were going to retire, play some golf, maybe go on a cruise every year. For successful professionals, that's seeming less and less attractive is the vibe I'm getting. They don't want to take all that valuable intellectual capital they've built over the years and just put it on the shelf. They still got gas in the tank. They want to stay active and involved. And there's a sense of fulfillment and purpose they can get from work. Now, they might want to be able to transition from using that motor 60 plus hours a week and traveling and being in hotels. They want to have a little bit more independence and autonomy. So that's where this hybrid approach is really gaining steam. You're obviously right at the center of that movement as well. So I find it really exciting to be able to help people explore this challenging and dynamic, but ultimately exciting new way of doing things. It's more of an uncharted path. Folks that are doing this, they need to do a little bit more planning. It can be beneficial for them to get some more outside help from professionals. But it's so well worth it because, again, you can have the best of both worlds, the best of the working world, the best of the retirement world, and blend them together.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I've noticed in my research is that we're living longer and we're living healthier longer. So all of a sudden, this idea of, hey, at 60 something, we'll retire. But now all of a sudden, you got 30 years ahead of you, maybe, especially as younger people come in here with. So all of a sudden, that whole, whether it be the financial planning or just what am I going to do with my time? Do I want to spend 30 years playing pickleball? That probably doesn't appeal to as many people anymore. Why don't we start with, as you talk about the hybrid approach, how would you describe that for people?
I like to borrow some terminology from my colleague, Rob Morrison. He wrote a book a couple of years back called Victory Lap Retirement. And the first time I picked up that book, before we even started working together, I loved the concept. And it just encapsulates this hybrid approach of when you get to the finish line, you don't need to just full stop. Maybe slow down, run at your own pace, but you can do another couple laps around the track if you'd like. But again, it's what you want to do You get to dictate the pace. You get to decide when you want to stop. Maybe if you want to take a break, pick it back up again, whatever it is. So I love that victory lap concept. And I think it's a nice way to encapsulate what we're ultimately trying to achieve.
Sure. And that right along with my tagline is non-core career, you work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love,
Exactly.
That whole idea. That's great. What are some of the elements of hybrid work? If I'm sitting or thinking about retirement, what's it look like for me if I jump into something like that?
Yeah. So I think, again, because this is the non-traditional path, you need to do a lot more planning. You can't follow the default path and just say, oh, I'm going to, again, work into my mid-60s, stop, plug into Medicare, Social Security, live off savings. It's a little bit more complicated than that. The earlier, the better in terms of starting planning. And we'll talk about the planning framework I always work through. But in your 50s is a perfect time to start thinking about these things. Depends, again, on ultimately when you want to make that downshift. But if you can start working on this 1, 2, 3 years ahead of that downshift, you're going to set yourself up for success, because a lot of these things take time to develop, especially with encore careers. Those are not just listed on a job board that you can just plug in tomorrow. They take years of cultivation and pivoting and iteration to really fine tune to where you want. So that's where I see the process starting. And when I talk with folks that are at this, what I call a career crossroads, the first thing we think about is, what is your vision for the next chapter? What's important to you? What do you want to be doing? With whom? Where? What do you not want to be doing? All those things need to get distilled into your vision for the next chapter. Again, maybe it's a hybrid situation where you can work anywhere across the country so you can spend time with friends and family and adventuring. Or maybe it's, I want to be able to pursue my passion. Whatever it might be, let's get really clear on your North Star, where everything else should align behind. Because when I'm helping somebody build a financial plan, I need to know their true north. Everybody's true north is a little bit different. So that's where we start, get focused on that vision for the future. After we've got that, then we can start breaking it down into actionable goals, financial goals, work goals, relationship goals for hobbies and time. Get granular on those things and make sure that all those goals are in support of that vision.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, I think, because of the longer timeline, even in today's world, people are thinking you may have a couple of careers in your working life. That may actually be true in your post-working life, as it were. You may have a period of sabbatical right after you finish full-time work, but then you may want to jump into some, like you say, hybrid work for a while. But then you may say, if I look out 10 years, I want to be dialing that back in 10 years or something. So I think there's again, because we're talking a longer time frame, there's more different things you may need to think through or plan.
Yep, exactly. And there's going to be pivots and iterations. This is not something we're carving in stone. And I think there's an Eisenhower quote, or it's attributed to him, that the plan is worthless, but planning is everything, right? So that we at least know the direction we're trying to head, and then we can reorient the plan as needed.
Sure. Absolutely. So when you think of the hybrid work, so do you help people decide how much hybrid work they have to do, or it's one of those things? And again, we all like to think everybody's going to go into this with a wonderful plan and great savings, et cetera, et cetera. But quite frankly, with the pandemic, people got pushed out of jobs. People didn't see the growth they were hoping for in investments. Do you help people talk through, hey, what needs to be your next step?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then that's why your Victory Lap career plan and your financial plan have to be woven together, right? Because they are there in support of each other. Some people, again, might have hit a rough patch over the last couple of years, and they're going to need to go in a different direction. Maybe they thought they were going to need to go in 2019, but that's okay. Again, let's plan for it. Let's make the adjustments necessary and then start moving forward. Again, we'll talk about the financial planning process, but also when it comes to the kind of work planning process, I like to break it down. I've got this 2x2 matrix that I use to help people think about this, right? And there's kind of two types of cash flow. We start with your cash flow needs from work first. There is we call it the work to live cash flow mode. That means your encore career is going to be providing necessary cash flow for your basic needs, right? So you're not in a position where you can just completely stop working. You need some cash flow. Maybe it's less than you needed before because you've downsized, the house is paid off, the kids are out of the house, whatever it might be. Oftentimes at this stage in life, we see potentially a significant reduction in kind of cash flow overhead. Mm-hmm. So that work to live is one cash flow model we see people fall into. If you are closer to financial independence, you might be to the place where you have enough income streams from investments, whatever it might be, that can support your basic needs. And the income from your Encore career is going to be more of the fun money, or we call it a play check, right? So you have your passive plus play check is what we like to call it. So that's the first thing we need to think about what's the right Encore career for me is understanding your cash flow needs. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we think about two different modes of work. The first one, the kind of one we all think about first, is glide pathing, where we're doing the same thing, staying in the same field of expertise that we have always been in, but we're just dialing it back to a certain degree. So there are a couple different ways to do that glide pathing. Obviously, you could go part-time. It could be more of a hybrid role. It could be consulting, contract work, whatever it might be. And then the other one is more of the hard pivot, right? Those are the passion projects. So that is somebody who might be pursuing arts or a hobby, maybe working in a community or a nonprofit. So those are the two styles of work, glide pathing and the passion projects. And then we overlay those two to come up with that 2x2 matrix. Okay. And when I distill it all down from working with a number of people going through this transition, each one of those 4 boxes has the most typical option. So one of the most typical options is consulting. So that is the glide pathing approach with the work to live cash flow needs. If you stay in the glide pathing arena, but you're a little bit more financially independent and you can have more of that in that play check mode, then it might be serving on boards or something else like that, where you're still deploying your expertise, but you don't have the regular compensation to support your cash flow needs. So that's 2 of the parts of the matrix. The other 2 parts are on the passion projects, right? If you are pursuing a passion project, but you still need cash flow, you're in the work to live mode. That could be maybe pivoting to something in the nonprofit sector where you're still employed, but you're working probably at a lower rate of pay because you're in the nonprofit sector, or you're in a community type of situation, the education sector, the caregiving sector. That is one way. And then typically, if somebody's going to do the pivot into the arts or entrepreneurship, you need to have a little bit more of a nest egg and a financial foundation so that you can pursue that. Those things might actually take more money to invest in, and you're going to need enough money to support your basic cash flow needs as well. So that's a matrix. I know it's difficult to describe verbally, but I do have a Career Crossroads workbook I'd love to share with the audience. We can link to it that goes through in detail those different work styles, those cash flow styles, lays out the matrix. And I think that's a helpful way just to start thinking about, okay, what type of hybrid work will work for me and what maybe should I not spend too much time thinking about?
Sure. Now, it's been interesting as I've talked to some people, some of them that do have some resources think they want to go into, we'll say, volunteer work, want to work at this. But then some of them also say, I still like using my skills and knowledge. And of course, my whole career, pay was the marker of my success using that skills and knowledge. Do you find people that are, while they maybe could go into just volunteer work, they actually still have an itch to stay in the game, as it were?
Yeah. And there's that scoreboard part of things, is that's how we're accustomed to keeping score. And whether that's right or wrong can be important. The other thing with volunteer work is it's just, if you are a type A personality that is used to the corporate environment, working at the local food bank is going to be a different culture. It's going to be a little different than you're used to. Now, maybe you're ready, willing, and able to pivot. Some people are, but just be honest with yourself. And that, again, that's why giving yourself some lead time to test this out, instead of say, I'm going to retire and then I'm going to take a year off and then I'm going to go volunteer. Then 3 weeks into your volunteer gig, if you figure out it's not for you, you've wasted all this time where you could have been planting other seeds. And again, by planting those seeds earlier than you think you need them, when you are ready, when you do have the time, when you step off the treadmill, then you can jump right into something that you actually know you're going to enjoy.
So is that you talk about planting the seeds early? How do you help people that are still in their full-time jobs? What are some of the ways you encourage them to experiment with these new ideas?
Yeah. And it's really tricky, obviously, because when you're full-time employed, takes a lot of demand on your time. If you can, a sabbatical is ideal, but it doesn't always work for everybody. But even if you can take, most of the time people have accrued so much vacation and PTO that they're not even using it. Take 2 weeks off and try what you think, instead of dreaming about it every single day and never actually doing it. Take 2 weeks or even 1 week and say, I'm going to try this, and just dabble with it. And you'll probably pretty quickly see that, okay, maybe this wasn't what I thought it was, or maybe it's even better than I thought it was, and I want to go all out at it. But taking it out of dreaming mode and into action mode is really important. And it's just tiny little steps, tiny little experiments. You don't need to go all in on everything. Go spend a 4-hour shift at the volunteer gig, or go do the art fair if that's what you want to be doing, selling your art. Give it small tests, small trials. I rarely see somebody land in the perfect encore career right off the bat. It takes a lot of different pivots and iterations, and people end up in places they would have never expected, but they love it when they get there.
Sure. Well, I know when I first left, I tried getting to, for example, consultants, because that was my first thought, to do some consulting. And so I actually tried talking to consultants to see what life was like. And some of them said, Lynn, your picture is a little off from what life is actually like as a consultant. So they helped me really get a reality check on some of what that was.
Yeah, absolutely. You can shortcut the process by talking to people that are a couple of years ahead of the path than you are. Find those people, talk to them to really get an idea of, again, different ways to test your plan.
I think it's also interesting now that some people choose to be entrepreneurs. Their, quote, new business may be in the fields they were in, but it may be in something else. Have you seen people actually go out there and jump into starting new businesses?
Yeah, I have. And those are always some of the more interesting stories. I know a guy who was the corporate executive and now sells cookies. I see him when I go to the art fair. He's selling cookies and he ships them across the country. It's very cool. There's people that starting businesses is definitely something that a lot of people, I think most, I forget exactly what the statistic is, but there are a significant number of people over the age of 50 creating new businesses. It's definitely a viable path. Again, you got to make sure that your financial foundation is secure and the amount that you're risking in terms of monetary amount is going to be sustainable. And then again, start small. Start with small tests. Don't worry about leasing the building and building the logo and the payroll company before you have your first customer. Get a customer, then build the other stuff. Sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves doing the ancillary components of the business, and we forget to focus on the core of the business. The core of your business is ultimately your customers and your sales and your revenue, whatever you're selling, whether you're selling consulting or art or whatever, anything in between. Focus on selling your goods and services, understanding what the marketplace wants, and then slowly you're going to iterate and you're going to grow and then build the business around it. Again, don't spend too much time on the website and the logo and all the other ancillary stuff that comes with the business up front.
Now, one of the things I will say that I help people with their personal branding, because if you're going to, and actually it helps even if you're going to be in the nonprofits or whatever, but all of a sudden now, if your quote brand was tied to your job title, your company, whatever it was, now as you launch into doing something different, whether it be paid or non-paid, there is some interest in creating your own personal brand. And have you seen people grab onto that too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't hand out your business card that says Senior Vice President of such and such, because you're not anymore. So you need to find a problem that you're really good at solving. And then again, wrap your brand around that problem that you solve better than anybody else. And that's a great way to attract customers, find new business, grow your business.
Earlier on, you mentioned people can serve on boards and stuff. But that's a search in itself. How do people actually become, is it networking, or how do they go about actually being able to serve on, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit boards?
So I find it's typically through networking. Again, these are not postings you find online, say, come serve on our board. It's usually through community involvement or corporate connections, things like that, depending on if you're talking corporate sector or nonprofit sector. But from the nonprofit side of things, if that's where you think you want to go, obviously getting involved with the organization is the first step. understand what they work, their needs are, how you can support them. And also serving on a nonprofit board typically also involves making a moderate to sizable donation as well. So that's something that people need to recognize, is that the money's going to be flowing in a different direction if you're serving on a nonprofit board. So just be prepared for that. On the corporate side, it's very much network and connections. And again, it's a tight-knit corporate executive community. Again, you're not going to find job listing online to serve on the board of XYZ Corporation.
So follow up some more on networking. I've encouraged people to say, you're going to step away from the group of friends and colleagues you had in your corporate world. You needed to expand it. You don't need to give it up. Those are still people you want to connect with. But you do have to be more intentional about finding, I'll say, a new group of friends, as it were, out there, if you're going to either be whatever you're going to be doing in your next phase of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Because their primary focus is going to stay in that company world. You need to find people who are more traveling the same road that you are and understand your journey and can help support it.
Yeah. So I'd like to also, though, touch base on more of the details of how you help people do their financial planning. What are some of the steps you actually have people go through to help put that piece of the puzzle together?
Yep. Yeah. So we talked a couple minutes ago about the front end of the process, figuring out your vision and then the goals that are going to support that vision. And then after we've got those things, where obviously my focus is on the financial side of things, helping and making sure that the financial picture, their financial goals are all going to be met. So when I'm talking to folks at this juncture, there are really 5 critical components that have to be addressed, in my estimation, to make sure that you've got a successful and robust plan for the next chapter. So again, the first one is cash flow. You have to understand your cash flow needs, where cash flow is going to come from, and you need to make sure it's sustainable, right? If you need $7,000 a month to live on, but you can't support that, we need to make sure that employment's going to plug that hole. So just getting really clear on what your cash flow needs are, what your income sources are, and testing the overall sustainability, really important. Healthcare, health insurance is another really important one. I've seen this can be a big hurdle for folks, that the whole path looks clear for them to pursue an encore career, but the idea of leaving the corporate world, no longer having access to employer provided health insurance coverage can be daunting. It's expensive. It's scary to navigate that outside of the realm of employer provided health insurance. So you need to just think through that. The fortunate thing is that compared to 10 years ago or so, it's much easier for folks who are pre-Medicare age of 65 to go out and get private market health insurance on the ACA marketplace or otherwise. So health insurance is available to everybody now. Like it was not maybe 10, 15 years ago. So think through that plan, understand what it's going to cost, and come up with a strategy to bridge between whenever your, traditional work chapter ends and when Medicare begins at 65. You might have a gap. Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 10 years, but you need to have a health insurance plan that's going to help you span that gap. The next thing, the number 3 out of the 5 you need to be thinking about is all of your employee benefits and retirement benefits. So this could be pensions, executive compensation, Social Security's in there as well, your retirement accounts. All those things have unique rules, unique vesting schedules, age milestones. There's a lot of complexity when you start wrapping all those things together. So what I like to do is lay out a timeline and figure out when different income sources are going to come online, when other things might pay out, et cetera, so that you can understand not just a month by month, year by year plan, but a multi-decade plan of how everything is going to sync up. And then also on that theme of a multi-decade plan, we want to have a multi-decade tax plan as well. Tax planning is really important. Taxes are much more complicated and more dynamic when you're in this hybrid phase of life. But the good news is that you have more levers that are under your control. So we want to be doing everything we can to identify high income tax years and push those down. And we want to look at low income tax years and push those up. So what I tell people is if you can map out what the next 10 years might look like from an income standpoint, you can identify those high points and low points and smooth them out and find your tax equilibrium. So that's really helpful. And then the last thing, the 5th component, is making sure your investments are aligned with the rest of your goals. They're there to support your cash flow needs, to provide a long-term nest egg. You need to think about your cash reserves, et cetera. So that's the final component. And that's often where people jump to that they think that's the first part of financial planning, but I actually think it's the last. After we figure out all the other components, then we can plug in the investment portfolio to support the rest of the plan. So those are the critical components. There might be other ones as well, depending on your personal situation, but those 5 are almost universal that we need to solve for to have a successful plan.
Yeah, a couple of things occurred to me, and then it's in my own experience actually, is that suddenly I found out that if you're going to do business with yourself or on your own, you pay what's called a self-employment tax. And that's fine. It's appropriate, but didn't have any experience with that before. And then the other thing is, especially if I've been doing consulting, the income isn't monthly. It can have ups and downs that you won't always be able to plan and when the ups and downs occur, but you need to have a strategy to address them.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely much more lumpy cash flow. And you are in charge of making sure the taxes are provisioned, right? When you're on the W-2, they take care of all that. And you just settle up at the end of the year when you file your tax return. When you're self-employed, you've got to make sure you're covering your income taxes, your self-employment taxes, which is north of 15%, and state taxes, et cetera. So you might be waiting for that $10,000 check to come in. And then also when it does come in, that $10,000 is not all yours. Uncle Sam has got his eye on a pretty decent chunk of that, and you need to make sure you're managing it. So it can be very tricky.
Sure. The other thing is that you mentioned the investment strategies. While I'm not an expert on that at all, but I tend to think is now that when you're at, say, 50 and you're looking ahead another 30 years or something, or 40 years, it used to be you did growth stocks at one part in your life, and then you moved to more of a fixed income things as you hit retirement age. I wonder if that shifts around a little bit now that you're talking about a possible another 30 years down the road.
Yeah. You need to make sure that you're balancing the risk, right? That it's not so much risk that it's too volatile to support the cash flow needs that you might have, but it also can't be too conservative that it's not going to have the horsepower to make it for 3 or 4 more decades. Mm-hmm. So it's a balancing act there. And then also cash reserves are just so important to have when you're going into this. Some of the standard advice is like 6 months of expenses. If you're pursuing a hybrid approach, you might be measuring that emergency reserves in years, not months. The specifics are going to be, detailed to your personal situation, but expanding cash reserves and reliable income sources is really important to give you the confidence to make some of these bold steps and know that I can take a chance here for a year or 2 and see what happens, because I know that, again, cash flow is solved for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, certainly in my experience too, that from my business, my consulting business and stuff, there's good years and bad years. And so sometimes I say, okay, how many bad years can I have here and still make things work? So I think that just gets to be part of your planning as you move forward. Like I said, because you no longer get monthly income in the same sense you used to anyway.
Absolutely.
As you think about some of these other things, what are some of the steps, especially in your 50s, or say you find yourself, you've been retired or you're retired? What are the catch-up strategies that might occur to you that, hey, I'm not really where I need to be. I'm 55, I'm 65, whatever it is. Is that where you get back into, hey, we got to do some work to live here thing?
Yeah. And that's, again, I encourage people to not, maybe their plan got altered, right? They thought they were on a certain trajectory and the world's thrown a lot of curveballs on it this the last 3 years. It's happened to a lot of folks. Again, let's stop, make a plan. And the beauty of the Encore career is that if you do it right and the things fall into line, you might be able to find something that you don't ever want to stop doing, or that you're going to, instead of grinding it out for 3 more years, you find something you love doing for 10 or 15 years. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot of financial pressure off, because again, you might not need to, what I find a lot when we run the numbers is that you might not need to save at the same degree you had been saving. If you can support your basic cash flow needs from the Encore career, if you've built up a decent nest egg during your traditional working career, if you can just simply leave that untouched for another decade, that can make a massive impact. You don't need those extra 401k contributions necessarily. There might be enough critical mass there that if you can just let it continue to grow as you're in your encore career, it can work out. So people might often think that there's no way I could go to 50% of what I was previously making or 30% of what I was previously making and get by. But when you crunch the numbers and think through it, you might say, hey, actually, I think this could work. But that's, again, the critical importance of putting this on paper, putting a plan together, stress testing it, and get it out of your head and get it onto a plan.
Sure. So as we think about if somebody was to work with you or other people on creating a plan, how much time or energy do we need to anticipate spending on working with somebody like you and to create a plan? Is it a long process? Do you think it can be happen more quickly? I don't know.
Well, I think you can get started in just a couple hours. I mentioned that Career Crossroads workbook. I designed that basically from my planning process. I wanted to distill everything that I use on a day in, day out basis and put it into an actionable resource. That's a PDF. It's 35 pages, and it also has a companion webinar to support some of the things in the workbook. But the workbook is a lot of worksheets and fill in the blank exercises, so that you could spend a couple hours on the weekend and maybe watch the companion webinar, work through the exercises. By the end of that, a couple hours later, I think you could have the beginning, a draft of what we call a one-page victory lap plan. Again, start with your vision on top, the goals that are going to support that vision, and some of the actionable planning steps you're going to take to support it. So I think it's not as daunting as people might think. And again, action is so important here. So I think if there's one thing to do, start there. If you go through that exercise, you feel like you might be over your head, you want more help, there's links in there where you can learn more about working with me and scheduling a call with me to talk through that. I'd encourage everybody to check out that Career Crossroads workbook.
Yep. And we'll have included the link to that in our show notes and stuff. So everybody will have that available. Then the other thing that occurs is it's even with, quote, the workbook or whatever, this isn't a one and done process. How often or what's the rhythm that you have with your clients to revisit things as you go through their retirement or their life in the future?
I think you need to be doing a kind of broad reexamination of the plan at least annually. And sometimes the cadence we get into is, we kind of either set the plan or reorient the plan. And then we've got a list of action items. We spend a couple quarters or the year knocking through those action items, get ourselves to that next waypoint. Then we can reorient the plan. Has the vision changed? Have the goals changed? What are the next action steps for this next leg of the journey? We're not trying to solve for the entire journey. We're just trying to solve for this next part of the path. So break it down into smaller and smaller chunks. And then that helps it make it, we just know, okay, I just need to take one step here and one step here and one step here instead of I need to climb that mountain. It makes it a lot more attainable.
And then what you've implied too is that this isn't just a reexamination of your portfolio. This is actually a reexamination. What is it you want to do? Because your interest, what you're passionate about, whatever it may be, those things change along with whatever has changed financially in your portfolio or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your money and your investments are simply a tool to support your vision and your goals and, what we call your ideal future. That's all it's there for. So let's not get fixated on stock A versus fund B. Let's spend a lot more time thinking about your vision for the future than all that little stuff.
I want to thank you so much, Justin. This has been invaluable. I really have enjoyed it, and I know my audience will too. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience on encouragement or things to watch out for?
Again, I've said it a couple times, but it bears repeating. Make a plan. We're in New Year's resolution time right now as we're talking about this. I posted the other day on LinkedIn, don't make a resolution, make a plan. It actually has the follow-up steps to make it happen. That's why resolutions fail. It's because there's nothing built behind them. There's nothing supporting them. There's not an infrastructure in place to make that resolution attainable. A plan with the process we lay out for you, the resources I've laid out for you, you can actually have a reasonable degree of confidence that you can actually achieve that. So that's my big word of encouragement. Create a plan, whichever way works best for you.
Okay, great. Justin, thanks again. And I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate all you've shared with us. Look forward to maybe connecting with you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lynn.
Many thanks again to Justin for sharing his insights and wisdom and some ideas on how we can plan not only financially, but plan the life in our next. We talked about his journey and how he views his role, and he looked at retirement as a victory lap. And this idea of it's more important to plan what you want to be doing and not just about how you're going to pay for it. We'll have Justin's contact info, and we'll have a link to his free resource that you can use. So with an Encore career, the rewards are great. You can be creating value in the world beyond just that next pickleball game. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love. So if you're ready to get started, please contact me at lynn@lynnfrias.com or hop over to my website, lynnfrias.com, listen to a few podcasts, and get on the email list. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening.